The current lecture concerns the psychiatry of psychodynamics and schizophrenia as pertains to quantum mechanical states in the application of quantum physics, general relativity, special relativity, quantum field theory, and superstring theory as it applies to psychiatric psychodynamics and familial clinical therapy and analysis. What I wish to say today is that it inherently is characteristic of a biological system in which, or ecosystem, a set of organisms or unit organisms, in which there is a negative influence element which is highly complex and derived and exists in its state of existence of complexity and interacting parts, their elements per individual, or even the coupling of individuals' behavior in a complex way which is ingrainedly similar to a virus, a bacteria, or even the autoimmune system or the parasympathetic system in an individual organism. That being said, and quantum mechanically it exists because the quantum mechanics dictates that the smaller the greater the entropy, the greater the life system will exist, exterior or interior to the point. I mean, that's why the eye and the ear are so highly evolved, because the waveforms are so oscillating at such a high frequency. It forces very chaotic and high entropy, meaning that the biological evolutionary system, quantum mechanics, can form very complex interacting parts. This is due principally to the fact that physics itself and the universe cosmologically is ingrained with multiple theories interacting in complex biological parts, not really biological but physical parts like electromagnetism, quantum mechanics, relativity, special relativity. And so likewise, the life forms tend to imitate this as a method of fractal reproduction or self-similarity, forgetting momentarily that fractals are in fact complex dynamic systems involving rotation and translation. We can simply analogize it to mean that things reproduce themselves over and over again at the Platonic level, meaning that symbolic difference, the second derivative, the force equation, is inherently repeated over and over again in complex systems at the Platonic level, meaning the abstractions are repeated over and over again. On a third order level, this means that abstract sets are repeated over and over again. It has no meaning for first order systems. What this means symbolically in Aleph 1 and Aleph null is that Aleph 1 is, as a Platonic form, a second order form of logic, is inherently countable. Henceforth, bypassing Platonic orders in Aleph null, uncountable linear systems, you can arrive at a Platonic countable system through fractions by arranging them in a sequence, meaning that the Platonic form is more realistic than the first order linear Aleph null form. Symbolically, what this means in terms of the symbolism of sets is that quantum mechanically abstract sets exist, but linear sets, Aleph null, do not, meaning that there's a necessarily leap in quantum mechanics for the abstract set to exist from the linear sets, and the system was first passed through the linear system. What this means nodal-wise in terms of quantum mechanics, in terms of the wave node, is that the system starts out at zero as bound, leaps up to quantum Aleph null as a heightened point, like a sine wave, then goes back to zero again at Aleph 2, Aleph 1, the Platonic form, meaning it forms a node, meaning that neither nothing nor everything as the universe that exists in Platonic form exists as a whole or in part at any particular time in any particular way at the same time in all respects. Only parts of it exist. This is borne through by quantum mechanics. The way this applies to familial practicing of psychotherapy is that these abstract forms exist in the negative state. For each positive state, there's a negative state. The way this is enforced in physics is that the negative and the positive cancel to nothing, meaning that you can aesthetically derive something from nothing by saying there's a negative component to it too. In biology, this is evidenced by there are negative behaviors and positive behaviors, negative interactions, positive interactions between people, reality, people in reality, reality in reality, and people in people and people. What this means more completely is that And quantum mechanically, the system evolves to the point where you have highly evolved sets of negative psychodynamics amongst different familial relationships as an evolutionary measure for enforcing proper quantum mechanical high point evolution. By putting strain and pressure on the system, having negative checkpoints, the system is better posed to evolve evolutionarily across the long term, because the negative elements act as a counter effect to aberrant evolution. In other words, if there's a negative element, it can cancel out the effectivity of reproduction. You don't have unstable life forms existing, endangering the population as a whole over the long term, or even a semi-short term, or fairly long time, but not a very long time, like say 20 generations. Also, at another level of looking at this, you can safely say that quantum mechanically, an evolutionary life system exists in a negative state because it necessarily not only is a negative element and a correction element, but also quantum mechanically the pressure induced by a negative force or set of force among psychodynamics and familiar relationships means that evolutionarily it puts more pressure on the organism to evolve quantum mechanically. As the entropy becomes greater, the tensile force in the Heisenberg uncertainty principle forces more biological order and proper strong evolution in the short term by what's the guy's name? That famous evolutionary scientist that wrote that, I forget, I think his name is John something, but he's that guy that writes on evolutionary science, Stephen Jay Gould, that evolution tends to take place in short evolutionary bursts of extreme precocity. This is quantum mechanically evidenced by the nodal principle of waves. What does the elementary system of waves indicate? Firstly, two things. One, that matrix analysis in quantum mechanics is inherently a system of fractals, in the sense that quantum mechanics is essentially quantum mechanical in nature, but also the matrices themselves are inherently quantum mechanics, and that they're composed of three things: elements, indexed elements, and an anti-commutation rule. They possess, like spinors in general relativity, they possess both orientation and magnitude, and also multiplicity, meaning that there are 3 or 4 different ways of defining them collinearly, meaning that they're both Newtonian and general relativistic and special relativistic, and also inherently quantum mechanical. This indeed leads to a grand unified principle of physics, in the sense that the universe is inherently 36 equations about statements in weights of 6s about 8 things, meaning that the 6 things mean there are 6 different ways of defining each particular equation or statement, and there are 8 different elements to which each pertains, meaning the constants within the Kharkomar equations written as k sub I, a, b, c equals k sub a, k sub b, k sub c times 3 Dirac spinors. The spinors have constant coefficients relating 8 different terms. These 8 terms are 1, minus 1, square root, squared, 0, infinity, and I, and minus I. Or I and E or something. I forget what the last 2 are. Anyways, by affixing these, you can derive a complete set of equations, or rather statements, which generate the universe as a particulate whole. This way, the universe may be perceived as a unique integrated third-order fractal. The reason why it's so much more complex is because you get swapping of variables in third-order systems, meaning the universe is inherently a third-order form as a whole. It doesn't exist as a whole because third-order forms are indeterminate, in that they're both Aleph-1 and Aleph-2 countable, leading to the contradiction that they're both countable and uncountable, meaning that the universe is both nothing and infinite, meaning it both exists and doesn't exist. In this sense, that skew symmetry admits solutions that are inherently negative and positive. In other words, they cancel to nothing. They're both symmetric and antisymmetric, meaning that they cancel to nothing and both exist and don't exist. And the third order symmetry is that they are both negative and positive, meaning that minus x equals x, f of minus x equals minus f of x, and minus f of x equals minus f of minus X. The three forms of inherent symmetry within functions are indeed manifested within the quantum general relativistic quantum gravity theory of unified wholes. In this sense, you can compare two things, saying that although a particular class, say two opposites, a predator and a prey, are both opposites, they are also both animals, so they're both symmetric and antisymmetric. This is inherently manifest in the definition of the dialectic as effective in psychodynamics, in the sense that the strength of the dialectic is that whereas you can consider a positive in Aristotelian logic, you don't get the proper contrast by considering it's negative until you use dialecticism, in which case the canceling effect of the negative element is influenced by other mechanical properties of the system and neurochemicals in consideration of the whole and relative to other things. But in considering the negative, it's not really the same thing as considering the positive with only a minus sign, because it's also, not only is it antisymmetric, but it's also symmetric at the same time, meaning that you're considering a wholly different object that is indeed related to the positive statement or positive term as a whole, meaning it leads to new, fresh insight, is indeed vigorous and effective in deriving new equations and principles. That is the strength of the dialectic. As a dialectic therapy, it simply means that schizophrenia is split-brain personalities, meaning that schizophrenia is complex because it's both 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 dimensional, meaning it's inherently 6 or 7 things. It appears to be 7 things. The numbers 2 through 9 minus maybe 8 or something. It's kind of strange because it wavers about 8, because in fact 8 disorders, but it's the other 7 numbers because it's a nodal point defined quantum mechanically, meaning that the system does not admit the nodal point for what it is, because it's defined as the terms of a disability, an inability of the neurons to respond correctly in 3s. They respond only in 2s. At this point, I would like to suggest that psychiatry itself is an example of a system of, or a set of symptomatologies like autism and bipolar and schizoaffective and so forth. They're indeed physical manifestations of biology attempting to tune to physics. The problem with physics is that it involves contradictory principles such as symmetry breaking in rings, which are not effective in biological systems, in the fact that a consideration of the physical dynamic system as a whole as an evolutionary process to evolve to a physical system manifests in biological terms means that the system, whereas it is inherently stable at the unit biological level per organism, since it represents a manifestation of grand unified physics as a whole, meaning the system is inherently unstable because grand unified physics is inherently self-contradictory in a lot of different ways, meaning that the organism is self-contradictory or disabled. Also in psychodynamics, I wish to say that these negative elements that exist as cohesive, integrated, complex, multiple part component systems, such as parents and siblings having the parents having control over the sons, is manifested as a very strong statement as saying that although the parents often have unusual and uncanny control over the kids, it can be safely be said this is not really their fault through intention or design, but rather quantum mechanics making the leap from first to platonic level to achieve a more integrated negative whole. I mean, the integrated negative element is very strongly concerted. And to this effect, I would like to suggest that perhaps 25% of the mentally ill people diagnosed with schizophrenia and bipolar are in fact not even mentally ill. In fact, I would like to say that these 25% represent the ones who are not in medicine or have jobs and do not have it doesn't really matter if you've got a strong psychiatric history, like hospitalizations. It just means that they're not really symptomatic. It's more like schizotypal or the other kind. There's some other kind. I forget what it is offhand. Schizophrenic form is what the other form is. But these just replicate or insinuate schizophrenia. They're not indeed mental illnesses. They're just very strongly resemble it in a lot of ways. So it becomes undiscernible to psychiatrists at first. Indeed, the matrix components of matrices with respect to the quantum mechanical nature of a matrix, and the general relativity admits a string theoretical analysis because 10 dimensions plus 16 dimensions, quantum mechanics is 10-dimensional. General relativity is 16-dimensional. When you add the two together, you get 26 dimensions, which is indeed the systemic weight of quantum string theory and superstrings, meaning that it's a compound integration of both across the, I think Goldbach's theorem, which is indeed unprovable. Not only is Goldbach's theorem unprovable, but also the two parts admit that they're the negation of each other. Quantum mechanics being purely physics, which is imaginary, and general relativity essentially being nothing, which is zero, meaning that mass is the quantum mechanical conjugate of zero, meaning that it exists. Quantum mechanics is the quantum conjugate of continuity, meaning it only exists in quantized states, meaning the two are both symmetric and antisymmetric, and indeed cross-symmetric with respect to quantum string theory, which includes things like supersymmetry, which is indeed a quantum mechanical, quantum gravitational theory of reality. Incorporating the strong force has proved unusually hard. Currently, the integration of the strong force involves the juxtaposition of the two forces not seen quantum mechanically, in the sense that only one type of force, gravitation, strong theory, or electroweak, strong, and gravitational, may act on a particle at any particular time. This is indeed an effect of, I would say it indicates that not that the one coordinate is quantized, but rather that they're semi-quantized, meaning that for each particular element, it forces one of the three theories to be imaginary and the other two cancel. And that being said, it's kind of strange because the forces always cancel up, like the strong and the electroweak. If you take any two of them, or the electroweak and the gravitational, and the other one's imaginary, the way this becomes real in this sense is when you define all three particles, quantum mechanically they can't be imaginary, because the fact that it's three forces a three-body problem with respect to pairing, which is quantum mechanical, which is the coupling of matrices, which is antisymmetric under matrix multiplication, but continuous under general relativity, meaning that general relativity is inherently symmetric, quantum mechanics is asymmetric, and quantum chromodynamics is anti-skew symmetric, meaning that the three symmetries tend to cancel each other out, bringing f of minus x into minus f of minus x by applying the rotations 3 times over to bring a null effect, meaning that it is inherently unchanged but processed 3 different times. You only take 2 of the coordinates, leave 1 out. For one effect, quantum mechanically, for the other effect, quantum mechanically, you leave 2. Consider 1 and 2, and then 2 and 1 as a wave node. Like neutrinos, the inherent quantum mechanics of the particle oscillates back and forth in the fact that it either exists or doesn't exist. Either it's 2 forces acting on it and 1 force is imaginary. Those 2 forces cancel. It doesn't exist. It exists. 2 forces. The other 2 forces cancel. 1 is imaginary, and so forth. And it just rotates around that way until you get a positive scalar term, the Banach space, I squared plus j squared plus k squared, which is indeed real, but it's only through this juxtaposition of forces you arrive at a real entity. In psychodynamics, this is evidenced by the fact that the complex systems often exist in complex collate psychodynamic forms, such as subliminal reasoning, which is indeed quantum mechanical, in the sense that the quantum mechanics of the subliminal system dictate that the subliminal system is never inherently real. It's sort of supposed, meaning it has influence, but it's not actually influenced quantum mechanically, only gravitationally, and according to the strong force, but those 2 forces cancel, so it doesn't really exist. You take the absolute measurement, it does, but it's quantum mechanical again at that stage, meaning it doesn't exist, then it does exist. Doesn't exist, then does exist, in which case it has influence or doesn't have influence, but only with respect to relativity or quantum mechanics. Meaning the 2 juxtapose around, and you get an effect which is gravitational or quantum mechanical, means that it's evolutionary, or continuous, but not both at the same time, meaning that subliminal thought is never particularly real or effective, although quantum mechanically you can derive subliminal results from integrated systems by considering media, such as TV or books. In other words, glean knowledge from a suppository of projected states using psychic force to derive a integrated view of the system of reality by considering subliminal reading or interacting with a television, by integrating the projected force of unified fields, like in the sense that the quantum Feynman Feynman diagrams are inherently toroidal, or at least loop-based, in two-dimensional, like tubes. It means that affect is inherently a dictionary and not just a linear term. That's why children are so simple and adults are so complex and refined, that they have an entire dictionary of experience. In that sense, you can read an entire person's personality off a simple dictionary definition. That being said, this definition entails a number of things. It's the way, in principle, I derive my results and work. I would like to conclude this lecture by stating that by shining periodic light of a certain frequency in gravitational waves and strong force waves, you can generate new life forms in artificial life by substrating methane, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and some other gas, like the Open experiment. Quantum mechanically, you can generate new life, new organisms, by applying Tesla waves in proper three-dimensional form, or nine-matrix form, to the life system. Not a life system, but rather the organic molecules that aren't really alive yet, by just varying the wave pitch to force them quantum mechanically inorganic, highly entropic, thenceforth organic, using the juxtaposition of the three forces that the universe is composed of. By varying the nine matrix in a closed seven form, you can get a life system, 7 being the symbolic weight of life, 5 is the symbolic weight of life, 7 is the symbolic weight of the mystery of life. It's the number of constraints you have to use to push the quantum system superfluidic, meaning it's no longer deterministic. It is well known that fluid dynamics is 6-dimensional, and that the admittance of chaos is 9-dimensional. At the past 6 dimensions comes 7 quantum mechanically. 7 dimensions dictates that the system is inherently now superfluidic, hence infinitely chaotic at the gravitational level, hence quantum mechanically feasible of creating life. And in accordance with the fractaline rule, everything is repeated. Therefore, the life is just imitating, life forms, intelligent life is just imitating quantum mechanically the rules of the universe. Not that nothing exists, but rather that there has to be something capable of understanding the universe to help explain it psychologically. In that sense, the universe is also part psychological, in the sense that it has to be believable, or at least plausible at some rational level. That may sound like a strange argument, because you wonder which came first, the mind or the universe. A lot of theologians have wondered this. What they don't realize is that the two work together. The universe and the mind both exist from the beginning to the end. And although no life form existed in the beginning, quantum mechanically, that's just the juxtaposition of nodal states, meaning that nothing lived at the beginning. The universe was plausible. At the middle point, something existed, but the universe became implausible, meaning the two modes oscillate back and forth, both quantum mechanically at the particular level, like neutrinos, but also at the universe as a whole, meaning that so long as the universe exists, it is never believable. So long as the universe is nothing, it is believable, but life does not exist. Whereas when life does exist, the universe is unbelievable, exists, and is not plausible, that henceforth general relativistic in the Dirac-Spiner. These are indeed the system of Dirac-Spinors necessary for the 8th form, composed of 1, -1, I, 0, infinity, root, square root, or root, square, and E, I think is the other term, or pi. I'm not sure what this 8th term is. But anyways, those are the 8 symbols that have to be juxtaposed symbolically in 64s to form the Dirac force spinors for each component or the Kharkamar equations. The Kharkamar affixes are just vectorial terms or force constants, the K sub A, K sub B, K sub C. The Dirac spinors, the three product Dirac spinors, are just 2x2 matrices multiplied 3 times over, different ones per each with different 64 element constants composed of the 8 numbers. I'm not sure what the arrangement of the numbers or symbols are. I do know that they're periodic, not necessarily periodic, but symmetric in a very high way. It just represents symbolic rotations like around a ring. That being said, with respect to ring theory, the universe as a Riemann metric is inherently just a two Mobius strips and a regular ring. The regular ring is inherently nothing. The Mobius strips are inherently nothing. The Mobius strips cancel, duplicate to a regular ring. The regular ring duplicates to a Mobius strip. We both know a Mobius strip is an impossibility because it has 3 dimensions but only one side, meaning it's inherently 3 into 2, causes the universe to cascade from 3s into 2s to 1s into 0s. Henceforth is a quantum mechanical conjugate of something real coming from something that doesn't exist, or rather unreal, meaning that quantum mechanically the universe is just 2 rings, 2 Mobius strips, and a ring. Those are the 3 space couplings of the 3 space dimensions with respect to time being a coupling force. With respect to couplings, I wish to say that general relativity is itself inherently quantum mechanical in the sense that the Newtonian vector is 3-dimensional, the coupling force law is 2-dimensional, and the number of dimensions is 4-dimensional, and the number of entities acting upon the mass is scalars, 1-dimensional. 1, 2, 3, 4. Force cancels, that's 0-dimensional. You have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. The fact that gravity leads to life quantum mechanically means that it's also 5. There's no implementation of the number 6 in gravity. That's the unique thing about it. It imitates the magnetic field, electromagnetic field, or electroweak theory, whose number is inherently also 5. That means by the ring theory, conjugately around rotations, which I explained before, general relativity and the electroweak force are complex conjugates of each other quantum mechanically. The 2 forms rotate about each other, and neither form exists at any particular time unless the other one does not, in which case they don't have influence. Then they do have an influence, and it rotates about in a rotational ring, like a gyroscope rotating around. That is the effect of my theory. It represents a grand unified theory of physics and indeed a theory of psychodynamics for the evolution of familial psychodynamics and mental illness, in that the effect that the large-scale effect of negative influence is just a manifestation of quantum mechanics and general relativity, creating very highly complex structures which exist that imitate like the parasympathetic and the immune system, and negative elements like predators in biology, but which are in fact just at the unit organism, an inherent manifestation of fractals and quantum mechanics. Also being said that criminology is the inverse of psychiatry. Criminology is 4-dimensional, psychiatry is 2-dimensional. For any particular trauma or pain, it is essentially 3 taken down to 2. There are 3 things wrong and 2 things right in any trauma system as a dimensional count. 3 effects of malfunction, 2 effects of proper functioning. That's the effect of trauma. Criminology is just 4-dimensional. The reason why most mentally ill people are criminals and most criminals are mentally ill is that 2 and 4 average to 3, meaning that someone who's mentally ill that behaves criminally can equilibrate it out to a 3-dimensional normal effect, meaning that most criminals and mentally ill people, conversely, and mentally ill people and criminal people gain satisfaction of behaving the other way, because 2 plus 4 is 6 averages to 3, they feel more normal. Also being said, there are other conjugate elements to consider. That emotion is essentially 5-dimensional. 4-dimensional, taken away from that, is 1, capital murder. That may seem a bit numerologically symbolic. It is indeed inherent in complex Newtonian and electroweak theories, in which there are 4 Maxwell equations in the continuity equation. Likewise, in criminology, as gravitational is weighted, there's 3 Newtonian equations and 1 continuity equation, which is indeed general relativistic again. General relativity is just an effect of the continuity equation. It's the only thing that differentiates from Newtonian mechanics, and the only reason we observe special relativity. That concludes this lecture.